Thank you very much, Ronnie, our chairman. I would begin where Ronnie ended as the chairman of the International Griffinah Conference Coordinating Committee. And since we are pretty much at the closing stage, and I know everybody's tired, I want to offer our profound thanks to all of you who have come and remained, and particularly those who have come from overseas. My responsibilities as the chairman of the coordinating committee was not only to give some direction and put in a lot of work in relation to this conference, but also I was given the specific task of preparing an empty house for the International Griffinah Research Center. And my absence this afternoon from Andrea's presentation was in connection with that. We're pulling together some things. We're going to formally open tomorrow morning, and we're hoping that everybody who is here and others will attend that. This has been an exceedingly rich conference in terms of the breadth and depth of the analyses derived from research. And it has been interesting also from the various styles of the presenters to this conference. One of the things that emerged out of the conference is the recognition that both Garifuna and non-Garifuna intellectuals should utilize their skills and knowledge coming from ongoing research to improve the lives of Garifuna the world over, bearing in mind the conditions of poverty that many still live under. And in this context, the conference was reminded by our good friend from Dominica, Gregory, that culture extends beyond the arts and aesthetics to embrace one's way of life. So when we talk about the culture, we need to understand it in that broader sociological sense. This afternoon, I'm going to be brief because we still have 2 sessions before we close, and a number of us have a lot of work overnight. I want to touch on the question of moving from marginalization to mainstream via a Garifuna charter. A charter can be seen as an agenda, a platform, a program, a manifesto, which charts the way forward for our people. While it provides general direction and applicability, it takes into consideration peculiarities and special circumstances, not only between countries, but also within them. It therefore is not a formalistic, stylized document, but rather a living one subject to amendments and nuanced adjustments based on change conditions. It is therefore a tool grounded in historical and contemporary contextual realities. It is a uniting leadership document that can bind us into a force of enormous strength, and it has both philosophical and programmatic elements, the former, the philosophical, underpinning the latter, the programmatic. So I'm arguing that we really should have a charter to provide strategic leadership and direction to the entire Griffinah movement. Certainly, we need it in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Let us turn quickly to the historical context. First of all, the Taino, to which Kim referred, the Kalinago, the Kalina people, they all lived under a communal system, a system of what we call communalism. That particular socioeconomic formation had characterized all human societies wherever they were. But some had gone through that particular period and had evolved to other forms of formations. The communal system under which the Taino, the Kalina, the Garifuna, and there were some changes which I'll touch on quickly, is basically a closed formation based on public or common property of the means of production, and in this case, it is the land. It's based on collective work with a natural division of labor between men and women, between adults and children, and the collective distribution and consumption of the products of that labor. The tribe was the most important form. It was widespread in those communities. So the Kalina, the Taino, the Kalina, and I would say for now the earlier formations, the earlier sets of the Garifuna had lived under this particular socioeconomic formation of communalism. When the Europeans made contact with the area, with the region as a whole, they themselves had evolved beyond that system, and in some cases had evolved through a period of their own slavery and had reached a system of feudalism. And that system is characterized by a formation where the principal means of production, the land, is in monopoly ownership of the ruling class of the feudal lords. And that class sometimes merged entirely with the state machinery. And the economy was run by small producers, peasants using their own implements. So you have a situation where we had contact, if not convergence, of three distinct socioeconomic formations at a particular time in the history of our country. So you had the Kalina, Garifuna, with their communal system, and you had Europe coming from a feudal background, because that continued pretty much into about the middle of the 19th century, 18-something, when capitalism had emerged as a socioeconomic formation. So the feudal Europe made contact with the communal Caribbean, and yet they imposed a system that they had long passed of slavery here. So you had the contact of three distinct socioeconomic formations. Now this is important for us to grapple with this, because that formation provides the base on which a certain superstructure of ideas and practices and institutions rest. And I want to humbly suggest that we need to explore this a lot more. How the interaction, the social organization of labor, for example, was affected by the impact of not only slavery, but from the European standpoint of feudalism, how those may have penetrated into the socioeconomic formation in the Caribbean at the time. I think we need to do a lot more research. That's an area that we should explore. But for purposes of what I want to elaborate on in the course of the next few minutes is the fact that the Garifuna, practicing essentially a communalist system, and we heard presentations from Dr. Palacio and other persons here, and the question of land and how that is structured. The Garifuna, when they were forcibly ejected from St. Vincent, carried some of the ethic and the practice from that system and continued up to today. And I will tie that in a little later. The contemporary context of the Garifuna in a sense, shows two broad experiences. The St. Vincent experience, where historically the yellow-red Caribs were marginalized geographically and socially. They were pushed to the north, as we know. We've heard so much of that. And later on, the attempts to marginalize the Griffiner by putting them in certain areas. So the St. Vincent experience was interesting because you not only had that, but you had the elimination completely, wiping out of the culture, including the language. And we need to salute the progressives over the years who have brought a certain level of consciousness into the Vincentian society by going up and down the country with small microphones, doing cyclostyle documents and distributing them in the society to lift the consciousness. And we salute those progressives who have worked so hard over the years. Some of them are sitting in this audience today. We salute also the work of the TGHF and others in lifting the consciousness. We salute the work of governments, including this administration, and we heard Prime Minister Gonzalez this morning, in putting certain things in place, some of which were referred to. And importantly, to ensuring that those who are marginalized and oppressed are brought more to the fore, brought to the decision-making table, and enjoying some of the fruits of their own labor in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So that was the St. Vincent experience. I'm sketching this quickly because of the constraints of time. The non-St. Vincent experience, post-1797, shows a different situation. In a sense, there's a certain reverse. That while in St. Vincent we lost the culture, and that includes the language, the dance, and so on, they maintained it. They saved it. But they continued to be marginalized, and from my understanding, that is the case up to today. I was extremely happy in 19, I wasn't born then. In 1997, when Zorda and I went for the 200th anniversary of the arrival of the Griffiner on Roatan. And I was, well, needless to say, when the plane landed, I had to go prostrate on the ground and kiss the ground. And Celia made mention of the statue to Chatouille that was unveiled, and we were all present there. But it amazed me how our people survived on that island. And this is, you're talking about 2 centuries of them putting in the labor to make it into something productive. It probably was as barren as Balisu. And to be able to survive those conditions is testimony of the strength of our people. But that marginalization has continued a lot in Central America, where our people are subjected to tremendous pressure from the levels of poverty. And they have been battered and destroyed, their villages, by hurricanes year after year. I think we need a task for the intellectuals. We need to have a very serious political economy, a study of the political economy of the Griffiner. And I want to suggest that that be given some consideration by our intellectuals. Moving quickly along, we come now to the issue of the charter and the elements that I want to suggest, some of which have come out of this. Nothing particularly new from my standpoint, nothing novel. But I think it needs to be framed in a strategic way. As I indicated, there's a philosophical and a programmatic side to the charter elements. On the philosophical front, we understand the role of philosophy to inform, to enlighten, to frame, to underpin. And from our history, we extract something that is seminal, cardinal to the communalist practice, the whole issue of of sharing, of collectivity, of cooperation, of cooperativism, of non-exploitative relations, and so on. I believe it's important for us to extract that from our history and insert it in a philosophical prism that can guide us in the future. I have had the opportunity to study to live in a Garifuna family. As you know, my wife is Isla, she's from Belize, and Auntie Lucia is here, and it's been a very interesting experience living in a Garifuna family and the way it takes care of its members, the collective approach, and so on. And I have described the contemporary philosophy that I see in that family as a humanism. In the humanist philosophy has three cardinal principles. One, the defense of the dignity of human beings. Two, the commitment to the maximal development of the potential of people. And three, the struggle against all things inimical to dignity and development. Anything that seeks to undermine or destroy one's dignity and development, we ought to struggle against. And I have seen that kind of contemporary humanism practice among Garifuna people today. So I'm suggesting that we give some consideration to those two sets of philosophical considerations, those from our history and practice and those from the modern time, and the connection of forces that our people, when they exiled, took some of that from the past into the present situation. Quickly on the programmatic elements. I believe that we should have regular international Garifuna conferences. This one, I think, has been extremely useful, and I believe we cannot stop there. There ought to be at least a sequel to what we have started here in St. Vincent. And again, I want to take this opportunity to salute the hard-working coordinating committee, and I'm sure you'd want to put your hands together for them. The second programmatic element is the importance of building Garifuna organizations. And wherever they are, even when they exist, there is room for development, growth and development. Where they don't exist, we build them. And we have to bear in mind the particular circumstances and hence the various modalities that will be used based on the particular circumstances. Thirdly, it's important, as we are doing here tomorrow, to establish Garifuna centers that will be a focal point of information coming from research and for disseminating it. I'll touch on some issues of Garifuna emotion when I go a little later. Now, whereas this international conference provides what I call an impetus momentum, in the sense of a push, the impetus and the momentum means the movement, for Garifuna work in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The research center, I suggest, will be the mechanism for impetus maintenance. That is to say, our momentum maintenance, that we're moving and we need to maintain that movement. And we think it's an important mechanism for doing precisely that. Fourthly, I feel it's important for us to emphasize networking. And I consider this Garifuna conference to have been, in essence, the embodiment of networking. I mean, some of it, of course, preceding this conference. with representatives from the Griffiner, non-Griffiner organizations, from universities, government, non-government and private sector bodies. The conference afforded the opportunity to reinforce networks to forge new ones, utilizing modern informational technology. So it's very, very important for us to do these things and to network. I think it's important for us to establish a Griffiner journal, which in itself would assist with networking, but importantly, in the dissemination of information. I would expect the Griffiner Center, when it's fully up and running, to have certain programs. Language. Yesterday, a professor from Venezuela talked about a language nest. We ought to have studies in history, and we see the complexity of that from the presentations this morning. Easier said than done in terms of understanding our history. Of course, research. Fourthly, cultural training, whether it's drumming, dancing, craft, clothing, and so on. A seventh element of the chart I'm suggesting is that we have artifacts retrieval. We have to try and track down a lot of the artifacts that have moved from here and in various places, sometimes in personal collections, sometimes in museums around the world. Agostino Brunias, the Italian documentalist painter, has painted, I understand, over 100 paintings of the period, including the famous one with Chattu and his wives. It is my understanding, at least there was a time when Lennox Honeychurch from Dominica, and Rabbi will know this, was attempting to find the sources so they could at least document them in a book. I mean, if they had not returned them, at least they could be documented in a central place. Yeah, thanks. Now that famous one of Chattu, as you understand it, is in the Museum of Wales, and I'm hoping in the summer I might get a chance to go there and look at it. But we need to have a program of document retrieval. So I'm suggesting that for us to mainstream, that we need to have these things in place. Essentially a charter that gives strategic direction. I suspect that a number of our people, by virtue of being marginalized and therefore having limited vested interest in the system, and having tested a lot of survival techniques, and having a certain mental toughness, that we are well poised for challenging the system and transforming it, even as we try to get a central place in it. And some of the elements of this mainstreaming, of course, include the reparation. Prime Minister indicated he always speaks at United Nations on this question, and I support his view. In fact, I myself in 2006 at a UN meeting spoke to the general body on this question of reparation, calling for it. We have to mainstream the Griffiner culture into the educational system, of course into the cultural stream itself, and we have to take advantage of Carnival. Our experiences in Dominica, as Rabes indicated, should be instructive to us. We have to, as part of this mainstreaming, do a lot of work on heritage sites, including Balisu. So to conclude, I think we have done a lot of good work, but we need to have it framed in a way that it could give strategic direction to the entire Griffiner movement, bearing in mind that tactical moves will have to be made depending on particular circumstances. Once again, thank you for your time and thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.